Yeah, I think I hear it. Good to be here. Good to see everyone. We are studying 1 Samuel. We're in the thick of 1 Samuel and the good stuff, as I call it, because this is, as I mentioned last week, I think I've mentioned it 2 or 3 times. This is the section that it feels like um, an ancient version of a Bourne movie or something, because David is on the run. He's been declared an enemy of the state at this point. Saul wants him dead, and so he is literally place to place. Sometimes he'll go somewhere, somebody betrays him, and reports to Saul, "Hey, David is here. You just come down here and we'll hand him over." And so then somebody else will report to David, "Hey, Saul's on the way." Sometimes God intervenes with some providence. One time he had David just about surrounded or hemmed in, we might say, and a report comes, "Well, the Philistines are attacking. You better get back home." And so Saul has to turn around and go back. So it's a really action-packed section of the book, but there's a lot going on here spiritually as well. Saul continues to rebel openly against God. He will not accept the fact that God has said David's going to be king. Saul had his chance. He disobeyed, and the sad thing for Saul is Saul could be right with God. He just can't be king. That's been declared. And I think I've told you before, one time when I was a teenager, I had done something, and I got in big trouble for it. And so I knew it was big trouble, and we'd planned a trip to Six Flags. It was spring break. I remember that. We'd planned a trip to Six Flags. All my friends were going to go, and it was a big deal. We were really looking forward to that. It'd been one of those things counting down for weeks, and then I go and get in trouble. And of course, as part of the punishment, Mama says, your trip, you can forget about that. And so I got up the next day. This happened earlier in the week, and the trip to Six Flags was supposed to be on Friday or something like that. So I get up the next day, and I start doing chores, voluntary chores. And I'm working, hard work. I'm weeding flower beds. I'm vacuuming. I'm loading the dishwasher. I'm unloading the dishwasher. I'm doing laundry. You name it. If I could think of something, I did it. And so I come, halfway, 3/4 of the way through the day. I come and I'm reporting to Mama all that I've done, and she, just so proud of myself. I've done this, and then she says, I don't know what to say. I'm speechless. I really appreciate you doing that. That's great. Half that wasn't even on your chore list. But oh, by the way, you're still not going to Six Flags on Friday, and that was a consequence. And she was making the point that nothing you can do is going to change that. You made a decision. You did something you weren't supposed to do. You got in trouble. We're not backing off from that. And that's the decision that was made. So, I appreciate you doing that, but you're not changing that punishment. And so I didn't get to go. But Saul could be right with God, and he could go to heaven, but he can't be king. And nothing he can do. Of course, Saul's taking the other approach. I took the approach, I'm going to try to do everything I can extra and get in Mama's good graces. Saul's taking the approach of, well, you say David's going to be king, I'm going to try to kill him. I think I can stop that, which is ironic because Saul knows better than that. You're not going to, if God says he's going to be king, guess what? He's going to be king. But anyways, when you pick up in chapter 25, that's where we left off, chapter 25, verse 1. David, of course, has had a chance to kill Saul in the cave. By the way, Robert and I were talking about this Sunday evening after our class last week. We were talking about David. He confronts Saul after he cuts off part of Saul's robe, and his conscience gets to him. And so he confesses to Saul, and he says, he felt bad about even doing that. He could have killed him, of course, but he feels bad about that. And then he has this conversation with Saul, and we were talking about, does David just put himself in the hands of God and confront Saul, there where he could be captured? The more I thought about this in the conversation Robert and I were having, what I think, and again, we don't know for sure because the Bible doesn't tell us. It just tells us they had this conversation. What probably happened is, we mentioned Saul, the King James puts it, very discreetly, but Saul goes into the cave to go to the bathroom. His soldiers realize there's no immediate danger. They're hunting David. It's not the other way around. Probably his soldiers, his guard, they're off to the side somewhere. David and his men are in the cave, like the deeper recess of the cave. Saul doesn't know they're there. David, of course, cuts off part of his robe. His conscience gets to him. My guess would be that David, it's not that he didn't trust in God, but, you pray like it all depends on God, and you act how? Like it all depends on you, right? Still just Saul there? Maybe David steps out into the light at that point and says, "Hey, king." And if so, can you imagine Saul's reaction? You talk about jump. He didn't even know anybody was in that cave. And now it's just you and David. David, who's all grown up now and is not someone just to be trifled with, right? Not someone to be taken lightly. I mean, he did kill a giant. Obviously, there was some, help from God with that. But Saul, if you're Saul, you know he killed the giant. And he didn't even blink. He goes after Goliath hits the dust, and he finishes him off how? He cuts his head off. David is not afraid to get his hands dirty, so to speak. In fact, later on, this is getting on into Hebrew history a little bit further, but later on, his own son's going to rebel against him, and one of the counselors will say to Absalom. One of the counselors are going to say to him, "You don't want to go out." They were getting ready to go out, and David fled. He left Jerusalem because he just didn't want to fight his son. And so they're getting ready to go out and pursue him. We're going to hunt him down. We're going to finish this tonight. Kind of that's as the movies would say. This ends tonight. That was kind of the idea. And one of the counselors says, "Hey, you know your dad. He's a military man. He's a fighting man. I don't know that you want to do that." And so David's known. It's known that he's not a joke. So can you imagine if you're Saul and you turn around? Now, Saul was no joke either, but Saul's, a little bit older at this point himself. But he turns around, it's just him and David. That, I think, would also help explain why Saul gets kind of what my dad would say, mealy-mouthed. he gets, he's no longer, "I'm going to kill you, it's, "Oh, David, I'm so sorry. You're a better man than I am, and, I know you're going to be king. I know you're going to be king, and I'm sorry." And, that doesn't really sound like Saul, does it? Throughout this whole thing. But if it's just him and David, and he's kind of going, "Uh-oh, I'm on my own here. I don't have a bunch of men to protect me." Like a lot of bullies, then, their tone changes quite a bit. So I don't know. The Bible doesn't say again, but I think that makes sense. And having that conversation, that kind of got me thinking about this. If his men were there, as Robert and I were talking about, Saul's probably changing his tone quite a bit to try to keep his men. They probably are realizing more and more with every day that Saul is wicked and David is a good guy. He's not worthy of death. So that could be the case as well. So when you get into chapter 25, Samuel dies. The Israelites gather together. They lament. They bury him in his house at Ramah. David arose, went to the wilderness of Paran. David flees. Of course, he's been to see Samuel shortly before his death. There's a man in Maon whose possessions were in Carmel. This man's very great. Has 3,000 sheep, 1,000 goats. He's shearing his sheep in Carmel. And this man's name was Nabal. Does anybody have a note? Or do you remember? We've talked about this before, what Nabal means. Nobody has a note in their Bible? Mine doesn't. I just figured some would have that. The name means folly. Some translations have fool, folly, which is interesting. I mean, who has a child and fool? It could be Providence. It could be a nickname. That may be how he came to be known. Sometimes people get a nickname, or there could be some other explanation that we just don't know. I knew a man one time, in fact, to this day, well, I think I might can remember his name, but all I ever knew him by for probably 10 years was cornbread. That was his nickname. And if somebody had said to me, "Hey, what that guy you keep talking about, what's his name?" I'd have said, I don't know. My wife's very best friend from high school, still one of her very, very best friends to this day, lives in Murfreesboro now. But we just, for a long, I don't know how she got the nickname with Reagan, but Reagan calls her Cuz. And my kids to this day call her Aunt Cuz. And that's just, so my guess would be maybe this was a nickname, but we don't know for sure. But for his sake, I hope it was a nickname because, your parents name you Nabal, fool, folly. You got to kind of say, wait a minute, what's going on here, Mom and Dad? But, and Hebrews, when they gave their child a name, it was a name with meaning. So, we've talked before, Joshua means Jehovah is salvation or Jehovah saves, something like that. So they give their children names with meanings. And that's why when you see Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, they're taken into Babylonian captivity. One of the first things the Babylonian king does is he changes their names because their names all honored Jehovah. He changes their names to honor pagan gods. I don't remember what all the names mean, but I was trying to think. I'm trying to think of the Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah is all I'm thinking of right now. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Abednego means, I think it means servant of Nego. Nego was one of the Babylonian gods, so that can just give you an example. So Nabal, his name means fool or folly, and of course he was very foolish, filled with folly. But he somehow is married to this beautiful woman, this wise woman named Abigail. She's very pretty, she's smart, and Nabal, it says, was curlish, is what the way the King James puts it. Anybody got a note there or a different translation? What does the New King James have? Harsh and evil. I mean, that's pretty well sums it up. Curlish is not a word we would use a whole lot. I've got a footnote there that says cruel, harsh, evil. He was of the house of Caleb, so he's a descendant of the well-known man Caleb. David heard in the wilderness Nabal was shearing his sheep, so David sends out men, and basically he sends men to Nabal to say, hey, look, verse 6, peace be both to thee, and peace be to thine house, and peace be unto all that thou hast. I've heard you have shearers. Your shepherds were with us. Look, we didn't hurt them. Nothing turned up missing from them the whole time they were in Carmel. Ask them and they'll tell you. And so David asks a favor of Nabal. He says, let my young men find favor in your eyes. We come in a good day. Give, I pray thee, please, pretty please is basically what he's saying. Please give us whatsoever cometh to thine hand and to thy son David. So when they did, when they came they spake to Nabal, according to all the words of in the name of David, by David's authority, in other words. They said what David asked them to say and ceased. Then Nabal answered David's servants. You talk about a response. He says, who is David? And who is the son of Jesse? There be many servants nowadays that break away every man from his master. We might put it in our language and say that Nabal basically says to him, David, the son of Jesse, just that rebel against their master. He says, shall I then take my bread and my water and give it unto men whom I know not whence they be? So David's young men turned their way, went again, came and told him all those sayings. Again, as we just talked about, David is not someone to be taken lightly. This was just a common, and again, we've talked about this a little bit before, but it's harder for us to understand. I mean, we talk about common hospitality and decency and sometimes even lament that it's not the same as it once was a few years ago. But in their culture, it was even, it was extremely insulting to refuse someone just a common hospitality. And so David says to his men there in verse 13, strap on your swords, because we're going to go and we're going to handle this. So they girded on every man his sword. David girded on his sword. They went after David about 400 men, 200 abode by the stuff. So he says, the 200 men are going to stay here. We're going to go handle this. He has insulted me. He's insulted my men. We have been a guard to him. We've protected him. We've made sure nobody messed with him. We didn't take anything from him. I didn't go try to take it by force. I just asked for some help, and all I got was as we would say, a spit in the face. One of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife. And so he basically tells her what happened. And he says, this is one of Nabal's own men. He says, look, the men were good to us, verse 15. We weren't hurt. We didn't miss anything as long as we were conversant with them when we were in the fields. They were a wall unto us both by day and night, all the while we were with them keeping the sheep. And he says to Abigail, consider what thou wilt do, for evil is determined against our master and against all his household, for he is such a son of Belial that a man cannot speak to him. It's a way of saying he's like a child of the devil. He's such a wicked man. You can't reason with him, is what this servant is saying. So Abigail, she hurries up, 200 loaves, two bottles of wine, 5 sheep ready dressed, 5 measures of parched corn. She gets all this stuff, packs it up, and she says to her servants, go on before me, and I'm coming after you. She doesn't tell Nabal what she's doing, obviously, because Nabal is such a Nabal, a fool. And it was so as she rode on, she came down by the covert of the hill, and there David and his men come down, and she met them. David and his men are on their way to handle this. David had said, surely in vain I have kept all this fellow hath in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that pertained unto him, and he hath requited me evil for good. So and more also do God unto the enemies of David, if I leave anything of Nabal's left. And he says, I'm going to, basically what he's saying there, and the King James puts it pretty bluntly, but what he's saying is, I'm going to wipe out all of his fighting men, his servants. I'm wiping him out. David is hot. He is upset. So Abigail sees David. She falls on her face, bows down to the ground, falls at his feet, and she says, upon me let this iniquity be. Now, if you remember from our personality class, what did we say about Abigail? What do we call that? Does anybody remember this? Do what? She's a peacemaker. Does anybody remember that personality type? It's a phlegmatic, right? Abigail was our go-to textbook example of a phlegmatic personality, or at least a dominant phlegmatic. She's a peacemaker. She's coming out and she's going to, and she knows what she's doing, right? She hops down, she bows down. Then she falls down at David's feet. Upon me, my Lord. She calls him her Lord. She doesn't say, oh, you're a runaway from your master, you're in rebellion, nothing like what Nabal said. My Lord, upon me let this iniquity be, and let your handmaid, she calls herself his handmaid, please listen to me. She doesn't say, I got something to say, listen up. She says, please listen to me. Don't regard this man of Belial. She even calls her husband a wicked man. She's calling it like it is, but she's also knows what she's doing. She's making peace. For as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, thine handmaid, saw not the young men of my Lord whom thou didst send. And she says, as the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, seeing the Lord hath withholden thee from coming to shed blood, and from avenging thyself with thine own hand, now let thine enemies and they that seek evil to my Lord be as Nabal. She's already assuming he's not going to follow through with this. She's kind of using that as peacemaking, as if it's already happened. And now this blessing which thine handmaid hath brought unto my Lord, let it even to the young men that follow my Lord. Here's what you wanted anyways. I've brought it to you. You take all this. We don't want any trouble. I pray thee, forgive the trespass of thine handmaid. What did she do? She didn't do anything, but she's making peace, right? Put him in a forgiving mood, hopefully. For the Lord will certainly make my Lord a sure house. Oh, God's going to establish you, David. Now she's buttering him up, see. And this is not flattery. I don't mean to say she's just, vainly, there's a difference in compliments and flattery. Flattery is something you don't mean you're trying to get something. She's trying to make peace, but she's not just doing this lying to him. Abigail, every indication is she really is a good woman. And so, people in the kingdom, they've heard about what's going on. And so it seems that she's figured out from this, you're going to be king. The Lord's going to give you a sure house, because my Lord, talking about David, fighteth the battles of the Lord. And evil hath not been found in thee all thy days. She knows. You're a good man, David. It's clear. God's going to give you the kingdom, not Saul. Saul's wicked, and he's disobedient. He's trying to kill you for no reason. God's going to give you the kingdom. You're not doing anything wrong. Yet a man is risen to pursue thee and to seek thy soul. But the soul of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of life with the Lord thy God, and the soul of thine enemies, them shall he, God, sling out as out of the middle of a sling. She's figured this thing out. She says, you haven't done anything wrong. Saul's the one doing wrong, and God's going to bless you for that. And it shall come to pass, when the Lord shall have done to my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning thee, and shall have appointed thee ruler over Israel, that this shall be no grief unto thee, nor offense of heart unto my Lord, either that thou hast shed blood causeless, or that my Lord hath avenged himself. But when the Lord shall have dealt well with my Lord, then remember thine handmaid. I mean, I wish we had more time to talk about just she could be a foreign diplomat with a speech like that. She has, established peace between David and Nabal. And then David says, blessed be the Lord God of Israel, which sent thee this day to meet me. Blessed be thy advice, blessed be thou, which hast kept me this day from coming to shed blood, and from avenging myself with mine own hand. For in very deed, as the Lord God of Israel liveth, which hath kept me back from hurting thee, except thou hadst hasted and come to meet me, surely there had not been left anyone to Nabal. Again, he's saying, I came here with every intention of wiping him out. That's why I came here. And so, of course, David accepts the gifts that she offers. Abigail comes back to Nabal. Nabal's having a party. I don't know if he's feeling like a big man because he, really told David off, or what. It may just be that he wanted to have a party. But he's having a feast like the feast of a king, and he gets drunk. So Abigail didn't tell him anything, less or more, until morning light. But when he was sobered up in the morning, she told him in verse 37, and his heart, the King James says, his heart died within him, and he became as a stone. What's New King James have at the end of verse 37? Or any other version if you got one? Became like a stone. And probably most of us have had that feeling before. Maybe you narrowly avoid a bad accident, or maybe you have a bad accident and you escape with your life, and for the most part with your health. Sometimes there's that realization, and it does. It kind of feels like your heart becomes a stone. So about 10 days after that, the Lord smote Nabal, and he died, verse 38. So when David hears that he's dead, he said, blessed be the Lord that hath pleaded the cause of my reproach from the hand of Nabal, and hath kept his servant from evil. For the Lord hath returned the wickedness of Nabal upon his own head. David sent commune with Abigail and to take her to him to wife. So he sends servants. She arose, bowed herself on the face of the earth, verse 41, and she says she's going to agree to go with them. So Abigail, of course, becomes David's wife. Verse 43 mentions David took also Ahinoam of Jezreel. They were both of them his wives. Saul had given Michal, his daughter, David's wife, to Phalti, the son of Laish, which was of Galim. So Saul's given David's, I guess that'd be his first wife, away. Again, some things are recorded for us in Scripture, not condoned. You see this sometimes with the marrying multiple wives. The New Testament's clear about this, that God intends one man, one woman for life. And you look at every time a man took multiple wives in the Old Testament, how did that work out for him? There were always problems from it. There are always troubles that came about with these men who married multiple wives. So you get into chapter 26, the Ziphites. They came to Saul to Gibeah saying that, hey, look, David's hiding himself in the hill of Hachilah, which is before Jessamine. Saul arose, went down to the wilderness of Ziph. He's got 3,000 men of Israel. He's seeking David in the wilderness there of Ziph. Saul pitched their tents, in other words, in the hill of Hachilah, which is before Jessamine by the way. But David abode in the wilderness, and he saw that Saul came after him into the wilderness. So David sends out spies, and he understands that Saul was come in very deed. We would say, indeed, Saul had come. So David arose, came to the place where Saul was pitched, and beheld the place where Saul lay, and Abner the son of Ner, the captain of his host. And Saul lay in the trench, and the people pitched round about him. So David answers, says to Ahimelech the Hittite, and to Abishai the son of Zeruiah, brother to Joab, saying, who will go down with me to Saul to the camp? Abishai says, I'll go down. So David and Abishai came to the people by night. Behold, Saul lay sleeping within the trench, his spear stuck in the ground in his bolster, but Abner and the people lay round about him. So Abishai says to David, look, God's delivered your enemy. He's delivered your enemy in your hand this day. Now, therefore, listen to Abishai. He tells it like it is here. Now, therefore, let me smite him, I pray thee, with the spear even to the earth at once, and I will not smite him the second time. You know what he says? Give me one shot. That's all it's going to take. And I'll end this right here, right now. But David, of course, says, destroy him not, for who can stretch forth his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? Well, here's opportunity number 2. Saul had just said to David, oh, you're a better man than I. I know you're going to be king. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I need to stop this foolishness. And now guess what? Back to his old tricks. And now here David is once again with an opportunity to kill him. And Abishai wants to do it. By the way, you're going to notice something about the sons of Zeruiah as we get on into, especially into 2 Samuel. They're kind of always looking for a fight. They're pretty rough fellas, and it's going to get them into trouble, one of them at least. And Joab is kind of I don't know if he was the oldest. I don't remember if it ever tells us their age as far as their order, but he was definitely the ringleader, and he ends up causing David a lot of trouble. He helps David some, but he also caused him a lot of trouble. So Abishai wants to do this, but David says you can't stretch forth your hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless. So David says furthermore, verse 10, as the Lord liveth, the Lord shall smite him, or his day shall come to die, or he shall descend into battle and perish, which of course, as we know, ends up being what happened. The Lord forbid that I should stretch forth mine hand against the Lord's anointed, but I pray thee, take thou now the spear that is at his bolster, and the cruse of water, and let us go. So they take it, they get away, no man saw, nor knew, nor awakened. For, here's one of those occasions where God intervenes a little bit. For they were all asleep, because a deep sleep from the Lord was fallen upon them. David goes over to the other side, stood on the top of a hill afar off, a great space being between them. David cried to the people, but he also cries to Abner, the son of Ner. What's he doing here with Abner? We would say he's taunting him a little bit. And I don't think he's trying just to be cocky and arrogant. I think he's kind of trying to make a point. But, he's calling him out. It's really what he's doing. That's right. He's saying, you didn't do your job. Trash talking is not necessarily a new thing. David's talking a little trash here to Abner. And so he says, you can just hear him calling him, hey, Abner, answer us not. So Abner answers and says, who is this crying to the king? You can almost see Abner, like now he's awake and he's guarding the king. Who is this? I'll come over there and I'm the king's right-hand bodyguard. I'll take you out. David said to Abner, art not thou a valiant man? Who is like to thee in Israel? Wherefore then hast thou not kept the Lord thy king? For there came one of the people in to destroy the king thy Lord. This thing is not good that thou hast done. As the Lord liveth, ye are worthy to die, because ye have not kept your master, the Lord's anointed. As Robert put it, he said to him, you didn't do what you're supposed to do. You didn't do your job. And now see where the king's spear is, and the cruse of water that was at his bolster. You can almost see Abner, sitting there just getting incensed, maybe getting red in the face. This punk talking to me like that. Man, I'd love to go over there. And David says, hey, where's the king's spear? And you can just see Abner going, well, that's right. Wait a minute. And the cruse of water's missing. And David's saying, I got it. Saul knew David's voice, of course. He recognized the voice, and he said, is this thy voice, my son David? David said, it is my voice, O Lord, my Lord, O King. Wherefore doth my Lord pursue after his servant? For what have I done, or what evil is in mine hand? Now therefore I pray thee, let my Lord the king hear the words of his servant. If the Lord have stirred thee up against me, let him accept an offering. If God has done this, let me make it right. An offering, in other words, a sacrifice to follow the law, to take care of his sins, what he's saying. If he's sinned, he knows he hasn't, but he's saying, if that's what needs to happen, let me know. But if they be the children of men, cursed be they before the Lord. For they have driven me out this day from abiding in the inheritance of the Lord, saying, go, serve other gods. Now therefore let not my blood fall to the earth before the face of the Lord, for the king of Israel is come out to seek a flea, as when one doth hunt a partridge in the mountains. Some of that may be humility, but also maybe kind of illustrate the partridge. Partridge, it's like hunting for a needle in a haystack. Might be kind of what he's trying to say there, and just pointing out that this is foolishness. Why do we keep doing this? Why are you keep coming after me, even though I haven't done anything to deserve this? So Saul says, I have sinned. Saul's gonna, and this is definitely in front of his men. So Robert, what we were talking about the other day, may be, this may be Saul. He may be, wavering back and forth and having his moments where he thinks he wants to do right, but it may very well be that he's trying to maintain the loyalty of his men, to retain the loyalty of his men. I don't know, but it's really frustrating when you read these accounts and you see Saul just waffling back and forth, flip-flop. Want to kill him? I've sinned. But anyways, in this instance, he says, I have sinned. Return, my son David, for I will no more do thee harm, because my soul was precious in thine eyes this day. Behold, I have played the fool, and have erred exceedingly. And it may be that in that moment, the heat of that moment, he realizes, wow, he could have just put a spear right through my heart, and he didn't. Maybe I've been wrong about him. I'm sorry, David. But when you don't change your heart, just the heat of a moment, sometimes this happens when something terrible happens in someone's life, and it can sometimes get their attention. And some people, it gets their attention and they soften their heart and they change. But sometimes people they get through that crisis and it's right back into the world. And that's what Saul does. In a crisis, wow, I almost just died. Literally last night, I was this close to being in eternity. I'm sorry, David, I've been doing wrong. I've been pursuing after you, and this is just not right. I apologize. Please forgive me. But then he's going to turn around and, right back to same old Saul. And that happens sometimes. It may all just be an act to try to fool his men into, maintaining their loyalty toward him. But anyway, David answered and says, Saul does say, behold, I've played the fool. He says, I don't want to keep your spear. I was just trying to make a point. It's basically what David says. The Lord rendered every man his righteousness and his faithfulness for the end of my hand today, but I would not stretch forth mine hand against the Lord's anointed. He says, the Lord rendered to the righteous man according to his righteousness, and the Lord rendered to the wicked man according to his wickedness. But just so you know, Saul, I have the Lord's anointed. You see David's integrity here. Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah, I think he's figured enough about Saul to say, you send a young man over here to get this spear. I'm not going to keep it, but I'm not bringing it to you either. I'm not walking right into your camp, which again might lead us to believe in the cave instance that it was just him and Saul. But yeah, and it almost does seem like he keeps mentioning the Lord's anointed, like, come on, man, act becoming of your title. You are the Lord's anointed, but you're acting like a child of the devil. So may very well be that he's kind of using that to drive home point. Yes, sir.
I'm just wondering if, David was a student of the law, because Deuteronomy, 32nd chapter, vengeance is mine, that he'll repay it. Watching in these three chapters, God's word playing out in real time.
Yeah, which is interesting, and may very well be. In fact, I mean, that's what David is basically saying in verse 23. And that's what he said to Abishai when Abishai wanted to kill him. God's going to take care of this. That vengeance is his. So finishing up chapter 26 here, David continues, behold, as thy life was much set by this day in mine eyes, so let my life be much set by in the eyes of the Lord, and let him deliver me out of all tribulation. He says, I hope God sees this. He knows God sees it. It's a figure of speech. He says, I hope God sees this, and he'll deliver me as I've delivered you, Saul. Then Saul says to David, blessed be thou, my son David. Thou shalt both do great things, and also shalt still prevail. So David went on his way, and Saul returned to his place. You wonder if Saul says that last statement even realizes the full impact of what he's saying. It seems like he's just blowing smoke to try to,